Greetings. This is a lecture on, I have a series of lectures on obscurity and clear thinking. And this first one deals with some of the initial concepts that we want to talk about. Vagueness, ambiguity, definitions, different kinds of definitions, and that sort of thing. So having said that, let me share my screen. Here we are. So obscurity and clear thinking. This is the lecture one. And that didn't work. Why does this always happen? Come on now, there we are. With respect to critical thinking, obscurity is not just a matter of being difficult to understand. For instance, Einstein's essay, Foundations of General Relativity, is difficult to understand, but that does not mean it is genuinely obscure language, right? And notice it wouldn't be obscure to a trained physicist. On the other hand, sometimes philosophers, accused of writing obscure nonsense, have similarly responded that it's not really obscure to an informed reader, but they've done so much less convincingly. So my point here is that it's not always easy to distinguish genuine obscure material from that which is only apparently obscure, perhaps due to a lack of training or lack of familiarity with the terms or something like that. But if the critical thinker is going to accuse some material as being problematically obscure, the charge needs to be supported by the evidence, right? The critical thinker must identify the source of the obscurity, and that's what this lecture is, these next several lectures will be looking at, right? What is the source of potentially problematic obscurity? And again, what I'll mention several times throughout is that not every case of obscure language is problematic, right? I mean, I think very often poetry is obscure. Sometimes religions contain sort of mysteries and obscure claims, etc., but they're not necessarily problematically obscure. It often depends on the context in which the obscurity takes place, and does the obscurity prevent you from moving forward or making a decision or engaging in a course of action, that sort of thing. So you have to look at both. What is the source of the obscurity and why is it problematic? So we will specifically be looking at excessive vagueness, ambiguity, excessive generality, and undefined terms or really different kinds of definitions. So first, we're looking at the notion of vagueness. Vagueness results when the scope of a concept is not clear. That is, when there may in fact be some clear-cut cases, but there are also borderline cases, and these are not sharply defined. So consider the word bald, right? Well, there's certainly individuals who are clearly bald, and there are other individuals who are clearly not bald. But then there are the borderline cases, right? The comb-over person or something like that. And you have to say, well, how many hairs do you need to have in order to not be bald? Well, you really can't specify that. Bald is an essentially vague word. Blonde, well, there's some individuals who are clearly blonde and certain individuals who are clearly not blonde. And then there's that sort of dark blonde, light brown hair kind of middle ground, right? Or wealthy, I think, is a notoriously obscure word. What constitutes being a wealthy individual? Were I to say Bill Gates is wealthy, I don't think anyone would challenge me there. If I said I am not wealthy, I don't think many people would challenge me there, but there might be. So notice by world poverty rates, I'm actually quite wealthy if you consider me in relation to other individuals throughout the world. And so, again, context, why am I making this claim? Why am I denying that I'm wealthy? Or why am I asserting that I'm wealthy? What is the context in which this claim occurs? That has to be considered to see whether this admittedly vague word is problematically vague. So we have many such vague words and concepts in our language, but many, nevertheless, are perfectly serviceable in certain contexts. So it's impossible to get rid of all vagueness entirely, and there may be no need to in certain contexts. Sometimes vagueness is not really problematic. For instance, imagine I invited you to a picnic on the beach at South Point Park at twilight. I said, let's have a twilight picnic at South Point, right? Well, twilight is an admittedly vague term. There's no clearly delineated time when twilight begins or when twilight ends. But in this context, it's unproblematic because you generally know when you should be there, right? If you show up at noon, well, you're way too early. And if you don't show up until 9 p.m., you missed it. Right? So you have a general sense of what twilight is. And again, in this context, it's not problematically vague. But were I to propose that we launch the space shuttle at twilight, well, in this context, twilight is too vague a term to be of service. In general, there is a problem with vagueness when vagueness prevents us from knowing whether or not we should accept a claim or not. Right? The rich should be taxed at a rate of 55%, perhaps I might say. But again, before you know whether to accept or reject that claim, you'd want to know, or I hope you'd want to know, what precisely do I mean by rich? Real and perhaps more troublesome cases of vague terms might be torture. So for instance, is waterboarding torture? This was something much discussed in recent years. Reckless driving, what specifically constitutes reckless driving? Sexual harassment, obscenity, what constitutes an obscene remark or an obscene gesture, an obscene photograph? Again, wealthy, we've already talked about that. So here, these are vague terms, and in certain contexts, they might not be vague. I mean, it may not be troublesome vague, but if I'm going to prosecute someone for the distribution of obscene material, I need something a little more precise than it looks obscene to me, right? So I need to give it some clarity in order to enforce a policy or a law. The next thing that is a source of ambiguity or obscurity would be ambiguity. Ambiguity is importantly different than vagueness. In cases of vagueness, the word or the term or the phrase has a vague meaning, but a single one. But ambiguity is when the word, term, or phrase has multiple meanings. The multiple, that should be meanings, not meetings. The multiple meanings might each themselves be precise. The problem of ambiguity arises when we cannot determine which of the multiple precise meanings the speaker or the writer intends. So consider the sentence, Jessica rents her house, right? Well, here it's not the word precisely, it's the actual phrase, Jessica rents her house. Nevertheless, it is a form of ambiguity, right? Why? Well, because what do I mean when I tell you that Jessica rents her house? Is it the case that Jessica owns a house, which she then rents out to others? Or is it the case that Jessica lives in a house that she does not own, but for which she pays rent? So the sentence, Jessica rents her house, is ambiguous because it has two meanings. Now, the meanings themselves are rather precise. The problem is you don't know which one is intended. Sometimes this can be funny. So for instance, if I said the kids made nutritious snacks, right? Oh, you ate the children. No, I meant the children created and assembled nutritious snacks. Or if I say, I know a little German, little tiny person, right? No, I mean, in that case, I probably mean that I know a few German phrases or something like that. But again, the sentences are themselves ambiguous. So there are four kinds of ambiguity that we want to be familiar with: semantic ambiguity, syntactic, grouping, and ambiguous pronoun reference or ambiguous pronoun use. So let's take them in order. Semantic ambiguity deals with meaning. The word semantic usually is referencing meaning. And so the idea is the word, or perhaps the phrase or the term, has multiple meanings, and the context does not establish which meaning is intended. So take the phrase, Aunt Delia never uses glasses. All right, well, what am I telling you when I tell you that Aunt Delia never uses glasses? Imagine I set the context, though, and I say, Aunt Delia is getting up there in years, but her eyesight is still excellent. Aunt Delia never uses glasses. Or imagine a different context. Imagine I said, Aunt Delia is a salt of the earth sort of person. When she's drinking beer, she always drinks out of the bottle. Aunt Delia never uses glasses. Well, here the context removes the ambiguity, right? You're pretty sure you know what I mean if I'm initially talking about eyesight and then refer to glasses, or if I'm talking about drinking beer and then refer to glasses. Right? I suppose if I'm just an erratic thinker, I might be talking about beer and still refer to looking glasses. I'm not sure. But you see what the idea of semantic ambiguity is. Now, syntactic ambiguity arises from structure. Syntax always has to do with structure. Musical syntax deals with musical structure. Linguistic syntax deals with linguistic structure. Logical syntax deals with logical structure, etc. So when the ambiguity arises from the structure of the sentence, that's when it becomes syntactic ambiguity. So if I said to you, there's someone in the bed next to me, well, this is syntactically vague, or not vague, rather ambiguous. Right? Does next to me apply to the person or the bed? One might rewrite the sentence as there is someone next to me in the bed, or there's somebody in the bed that is next to me. Right? So the phrase itself, there's somebody in the bed next to me, is syntactically ambiguous, and it could be understood in either of these two terms. Now, here's where diagramming sentences can actually be of service, or at least thinking as if you're going to diagram that sentence, right? Because notice you would have to ask, in the bed, what does that modify, right? Or rather, next to me. Does that modify the somebody, or does that not modify the bed, right? So there are other forms of syntactic ambiguity that deals with, again, sentence structure. Imagine I said, biology majors need to complete Calc 1 and either Calc 2 or Stats 1 and Stats 2. Well, that phrase is problematic, right? Mathematicians would immediately see that I need to group these things, right? And because there's too many connectives and I haven't specified which ones take precedence over which. Interestingly, this phrase appeared in the advising sheets for biology majors and in our university catalog at one time. And, you know, it was pointed out, it took a while, but it was pointed out that this is syntactically ambiguous. We need to clean that up so that students have better understanding of what's being required of them. So for instance, is it the case that biology majors must take both Calc 1 and Calc 2, and then they need not take stats at all, or both Stats 1 and Stats 2, and they need not take Calc at all, right? So is that what you're telling me here? Is that if you take Calc 1 and Calc 2, you don't have to take stats, or if you take Stats 1 and Stats 2, you don't have to take calculus? Is that what this phrase means? Or does it mean that you must take Calc 1, and then you can either take Calc 2 and not take stats at all, or you can take Stats 1 and Stats 2 and not take Calc at all? Calc 2, right? So which does that phrase mean? Again, take the two calcs and you're done, or take the two stats and you're done, or does it mean, doesn't matter what else you do, you have to do Calc 1, and then the second half is either Calc 2 or Stats 1 and Stats 2? Well, again, the sentence doesn't make that clear. Now, if you want to know, it's the latter, right? At least if they haven't changed the requirements. All biology majors have to take Calc 1, and then it's up to them whether they want to take Calc 2 or whether they want to take Stats 1 and Stats 2. So you're welcome. Okay, grouping ambiguity. Grouping ambiguity is when it's not clear whether the word is being used to refer to the group collectively or to each member of the group individually. So imagine the sentence, secretaries make more money than physicians do. Or lawnmowers create more air pollution than dirt bikes do. Well, what am I telling you with either of those sentences? The sentences themselves are ambiguous because they can be interpreted in more than one way. Oh, I guess I didn't make this clear. So do I mean that the average secretary makes more money than the average physician. And so am I applying that to members of the group of secretaries and each member of the group of physicians? Or do I mean the aggregate? So the group of secretaries as a whole make more money than the group of physicians as a whole. That's why we call it a grouping ambiguity, because you're not quite sure what I'm referring to. Likewise, when I say lawnmowers create more air pollution than dirt bikes do, what do I mean? Do I mean the average lawnmower creates more air pollution than the average dirt bike? Or do I mean lawnmowers as an entire aggregate group creates more air pollution than dirt bikes as an entire aggregate group? So again, this is a case of grouping ambiguity. And were you presented with such a sentence, you'd want to ask the speaker, wait a minute, I'm not clear what you mean. You need to clarify that. Ambiguous pronoun references. This is when it is not clear to what or to whom a pronoun is supposed to refer. So take the sentence, the boys chased the girls and they giggled a lot. Okay, well, it's not really clear what the word they is referring to in that sentence. Is it the case that the boys chased the girls and the boys giggled a lot? Or is it the case that the boys chased the girls and the girls giggled a lot? Or is it the case that the boys chased the girls and both the boys and the girls giggled a lot? We don't know, right? So here we have a pronoun, they. It's not really clear what the referent of they is in that sentence. Now, when you find these kinds of ambiguities, right, the grouping ambiguity, the syntactic ambiguity, even the semantic ambiguity, here ambiguous pronoun references, particularly if it's in your own writing, then what you want to do is rephrase it in such a way that you eliminate the ambiguity. As I just showed you, right? You could do this. You could say the boys chased the girls and the girls giggled a lot, right? Well, we've gotten rid of the ambiguity. We also got rid of the pronoun, but we got rid of the ambiguity, right? After their father removed the trash from the pool, the kids played in it. Well, what's the reference of it, right? Paul agreed that once Gary removed the motor from the car, he could have it. Which did he agree, that he could have the car or the motor? Right? So again, the reference of it is unclear. Or imagine this, Mary gave a pink rose to her daughter because it was her favorite color. Whose favorite color? Mary's favorite color or her daughter's favorite color? Finally, we have Jim bought chocolates for his sons because he likes them. What does he like? Sons? Chocolates? Maybe both? Not clear. Vagueness via generality. Here, this is a wait, let me stop this for a moment. Okay, for a moment I was very worried that I was no longer recording, but I am recording, so I think we're fine. So go back to sharing my screen. No. Where'd it go? That's what I get for doing. All right, here we go. All right. Generality, right? And this is a lack of sufficient specificity, right? So if I tell you I have a dog and nevertheless leave unspecified what sort of dog, the class of, oh, hold on, I think I missed a slide. I did miss a few slides, but apparently I didn't put them into this. But imagine this. Imagine I told you that I had a pet, right? All right, that's a very broad category of things, right? So I've told you something, but that only gives you a vaguest idea of what that might be. Maybe I'm talking about a dog. Maybe I'm talking about a cat. Maybe I'm talking about a ferret. Maybe I'm talking about a snake. Maybe I'm talking about an orangutan. You don't really know. I just told you I had a pet, right? Now, I could remove some of that vagueness by giving you a term that's a little bit more specific. And I could tell you, oh, I have a dog. Okay. Now, the class of dogs is more specific than the class of pets, and it's a far smaller set of objects than the set of pets, right? Nevertheless, it's still a vague term, right? It leaves unspecified what sort of dog. Now, I might say, oh, well, I have a Irish setter. Oh, well, now I've gotten much more specific, right? So of the entire class of dogs, I've narrowed it down to one breed. And I could continue with greater and greater specificity by referring to classes that are more narrowly defined with fewer members, right? So you gain specificity when you're referring to smaller and smaller classes. Now, is this vagueness troublesome? Well, it depends on what this disclosure is supposed to do, right? So if I'm simply making idle conversation, you go, oh, you know, I have a pet. Okay, fine. I haven't told you very much, but it's not troublesomely vague because we're just having coffee. Right? On the other hand, if I'm asking you to pet sit for me this weekend, well, you'll want to know more than that I have a pet. You go, well, what sort of pet do you have? Oh, I have a scorpion. Well, you might not be willing to pet sit for me, but if I tell you I have an Irish setter, you might, right? So the problem is that this information, what is it supposed to do? How is it supposed to function? And excessive generality may prevent you from moving forward because you don't quite know what you're being told. Again, it's obscure, it's not clear. Also, consider being told that Clarence was arrested, or being told that Clarence was arrested for trespassing, but now we're even more specific, or being told Clarence was arrested for trespassing on a restricted military base. Oh, that's even more, right? So the more information you're being given, the greater clarity of what's going on here. And if you learn that Clarence was arrested, that may well lower your estimate of him, and it may prevent you, say, from hiring him to do work around your house. Right? So you go, oh, I heard that Clarence was arrested. I'm not going to hire him to paint my house or garden or what have you. Right? But if somebody told you more detail, for instance, he was arrested for trespassing during a protest against a company that was polluting a local river, well, that might give you a very different opinion of him. You might think, oh, I admire that person, right? Supporting clean water and protesting. And yes, he was arrested, but it was for a good cause, and I might very well hire him to paint my house or garden or what have you. The difference between a very general description and one with more specificity might be crucial, again, for making decisions. And so that's when you would identify it as troublesome. Well, there's not enough specificity here for me to make a decision. Defining terms, right? First, there are at least 3 different kinds of definitions, and I'll have more to say about definitions in a future lecture. But right now, let's just look at different kinds of definitions: lexical definitions, precising or stipulative definitions, and persuasive or rhetorical definitions. Lexical definitions, these are the kinds of definitions found in dictionaries, right? And a point sometimes missed is that dictionaries are not prescribing how people ought to use words. Dictionaries are merely describing how people do in fact use words. This is why they constantly have to update the dictionaries, right? If dictionaries really were prescriptive, then they wouldn't have to update them, because those are the rules, and we just have to use the language the way the dictionary says, right? That's not really the point of a dictionary. The dictionary is to inform us of how terms are actually used, right? I believe they've now redefined literally, so literally doesn't mean literally anymore. That's unfortunate, because I think that word actually served an important function, and I don't know what word to replace it with now, but that's another question for another day. But again, dictionaries are not dictionaries are not prescriptive, they are descriptive, okay? But these are lexical definitions. Now, precising or stipulative definitions are not the kind of definitions you find in dictionaries for the most part. Here, for a given context or relative to accomplishing a certain task, we may take a general term and then restrict its scope. So we precise it, we stipulate, oh, by this I mean. For instance, for a given I said that already. For instance, there we are. I have a colleague who stipulates in her course that when she uses the word ethics, She is referring to a philosophical theory for right human conduct. But when she uses the word morality, she's referring to a past, present, or future human cultural practice, often grounded in religious commitments, right? So whatever that might be, notice in ordinary language, ethics and morality are pretty interchangeable, they're relatively synonymous. But because she wants to do certain things in her class and explore the relationships between philosophical pursuits for right human conduct and cultural artifacts, she uses these terms differently, and it serves her purposes in her course. But just as a stipulative, but just as in a, but this is just a stipulative definition. In ordinary speech, these words are mostly synonymous and interchangeable. This is something to remember. I don't make that stipulation in my class. I really do use the words ethics and morality interchangeably. I might say that's an ethical theory, or that's a moral theory, or I might talk about ethical relativism or moral relativism, and I mean nothing different by those phrases. So I don't stipulate a difference between those two words, but I have colleagues who do. Here's a word I do stipulate for our course, which is valid. Right? We know that valid is an adjective, and it's only applied to deductive arguments. Notice it is not applied to propositions or ideas or statements or an ID, right? You know, in ordinary language, I might talk about a valid ID. Yes, that's a valid ID. Or, oh, I might say, oh, yes, you made a valid point. That's perfectly fine in ordinary language. But for the purposes of this course, we have stipulated valid is an adjective that applies to arguments, but it only applies to certain kinds of arguments. Arguments that are formal logic arguments, such that if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. It's an argument which cannot proceed from true premises to a false conclusion by the very form of the argument. So that's what the word valid means. If the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true. That's a stipulative definition. Outside of the context of this course, valid has other meanings and uses and definitions. In lexical contexts, I'm sorry, try that again. In legal context, we might have a law which forbids motorized vehicles from being used in a public park. But to be enforced, we have to stipulate what precisely constitutes a motorized vehicle for the purposes of this law. They might, for instance, stipulate that motorized wheelchairs are not considered motorized vehicles, while motorized bicycles or scooters are, right? That would be a stipulation, and it would be a necessary stipulation in order to enforce the law. Right? We wouldn't want to, I mean, the law clearly was not intended to prevent wheelchair users from using their wheelchairs in the park, at least so one would think. Occasionally, a new term will be created, creating a usage that had never been previously existed. Since the goal in this case is to propose the adoption of a shared use of a novel term, there is no existing standard against which to compare it, and the stipulation definition is always the correct one, right? Because you've just created the word, right? By blibble, I mean, right? And I'm going to tell you what that, define it by fiat. Though it may fail to win acceptance if the term turns out to be inept or useless. So people may not use my term, and therefore not use my stipulative definition. Nevertheless, if it's a brand new word that I'm introducing, then I might have to stipulate a definition. Now, this happens when proposing new theories, for instance, right? Like id, ego, or superego in psychoanalysis, right? Theoretical definitions are special cases of stipulative or precising definitions, distinguished by their attempt to establish the use of this term within the context of a broader intellectual framework. Since the adoption of any theoretical definition commits us to the acceptance of the larger theory of which it is an integral part, we are rightly cautious in agreeing to it. Newton's definition of the terms mass and inertia carry with them a commitment to, at least part of, his theories about the conditions in which physical objects move. So too with the definition of, for instance, neurosis in psychoanalysis, or delusion, or again, id, ego, superego. So accepting your definition might entail accepting your theory, and that might be something I don't want to do. I might want to say, well, no, I don't accept your definition of an id because I don't think there is one. Right? Persuasive or rhetorical definitions. These are used to persuade or slant someone's attitude or point of view towards whatever the defined term refers to. This kind of definition can be troublesome because it often distorts the real meaning of the term in order to cause the listener or reader to favor or disfavor a person, policy, object, or event. For instance, the word, what's all of a sudden now I can't think. Well, yeah, was that it? I'm thinking, I don't want to make a mistake, so I'll just keep it to myself. But certainly the one at the bottom of this slide here, a Democrat is someone who loves to spend other people's money. Well, that's a slanting or rhetorical definition, right? I'm trying to set up a negative reaction to the word Democrat by giving it an unpleasant or unfavorable definition. This kind of definition can be troublesome because it often distorts the real meaning of the term, as we've already said. These attempts to attach an emotive meaning to the term and thus serves to confuse the meaning of the term itself. No, those are the kinds of definitions, but how are definitions accomplished? How might I define a thing? I mean, what activity goes into defining a thing? Well, I might define something by giving you an example. I might define something by giving you a synonym term, a synonymous term, or I might define something by giving you necessary and sufficient conditions for the term, right? That's an analytic definition. So these are ways I might, these are things I might do to define a term. How might I define it? By what method might I define it? We can put it that way. So definition by example or exemplification, also sometimes called ostensive definition, right? So if I'm trying to define satin for you, I may simply show you a patch of cloth and I would say, this is satin, right? Yonder I ostend satin, right? And so I've exemplified satin and thereby defined it for you. Or showing you a color swatch and telling you, oh, this is evening primrose, right? And so now I've defined that the name of the color, evening primrose, with an exemplification, right? A sample. Now, the interesting thing is there does have to be a certain amount of cognitive setup in order to know how to interpret the exemplification. So imagine I show you a swath of cloth and I said, oh, this is the cloth I plan to use to reupholster your sofa, right? Well, you have to know that what I'm exemplifying there is the color, the weave, the texture, right? Imagine I show you that swath of cloth and I said, this is the cloth I plan to use to reupholster your sofa. And you say, oh my goodness, that'll never work. It's far too small. Well, the cloth is not meant to exemplify the size of the sample, right? It's meant to exemplify other properties. So even the act of exemplification requires a certain understanding of how to interpret the exemplification, how to use that exemplification as a symbol of something. It's pointing to something else, right? And that's what you need to do. But this is one way to define. Another is to give you a synonym. And I might say a colleague is a coworker, right? A confidant is a friend, or something like that, right? So I give you a synonymous term. A biscuit is a cookie in England, or something like that, okay? So I'm giving you a synonymous term. Now that this slide is in front of me, I notice this is a mistake because the bottom one is not a definition by synonym. The bottom one is actually a definition by analysis, right? So it's the next one we're going to be looking at, an analytic definition. Because notice I'm not saying a vixen is a synonymous term. I'm saying a vixen is something which is female and something which is a fox, right? So you take these two concepts, well, you take the single concept vixen and you analyze it into female fox component parts, right? So that's an analytic definition. So I was one slide too early on that one. Analytic definitions specify the features of a thing must possess in order for that term being defined to apply to it. It's identifying the necessary and jointly sufficient conditions of a thing. So if I say a triangle is a closed plane figure having exactly 3 sides, right? Well, that would be a definition of what a triangle is, right? Not every plane figure is a triangle. Not every thing with 3 sides is necessarily a triangle, again, if it's not closed. So they are each necessary, but they're jointly sufficient. Almost all definitions are said to be lexical definitions, are often in an analytic variety, where many of the lexical definitions are, in fact, analytic definitions. So they're lexical because they are descriptions of the way people happen to use words, and we put that into dictionaries. They're analytic because the way they define is by giving you necessary and sufficient conditions of the thing being defined. So the types of definitions, lexical, stipulative, rhetorical, and the uses that they can be put to, oh no, I messed it up. The types of definitions would be exemplification, synonymy, and analytic. And then the uses to which they're put, are they describing the way people actually speak, lexical? Are they precising for some particular purpose, precising or stipulative definitions? Or are they attempting to slant your opinion of it, rhetorical? Right? So these can change. Notice minor means underage, under 18 years of age. So that's what the word minor means. But this is a precising definition, but it's also it says the definition by synonym, but it's not. It's actually an analytic definition. So sorry about that, but I'll fix it in the mix. In any case, but you notice the point I'm making badly is that these kinds and uses can be mixed in different ways. Notice one might define minor in this way when writing a statute or a contract. Finally, some general remarks on definitions. Good definitions will be neutral. They will not prejudice the case against one side of the debate or the other. One should be on guard against those that do, and indeed seek to use neutral definitions that all parties can agree to. Finally, secondly, good definitions should be clear. They should be expressed in language that is clear and simple as the subject will allow. If we define a word in language that is more obscure than the original word, we accomplish nothing. This includes avoiding emotionally charged language, as I said in the previous slide. Some good definitions will nevertheless, even good ones, will sometimes be incomplete. Sometimes you have to get along with an incomplete definition. We're often confronted with issues and terms for which there can be, at best, only a partial definition or a stipulative definition. So sometimes what we would love is an absolutely precise analytic kind of a definition, and it just isn't available. Consider debates about what the proper definition of a game would be. Right? What constitutes a game? Or what constitutes friendship, or loyalty, or fair play, freedom, rights, a sandwich? You can actually start fights by getting people to argue about what the necessary and sufficient conditions of a sandwich are. Right? Or art, for instance, what makes something art? Could we really define that? The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein suggests that there are many terms where we cannot provide necessary and sufficient conditions, and yet we perfectly well know what the term means. So he was the one, for instance, who suggested that game is just such a term. Lots of people know what games are. I know what games are. You know what games are. I know what games are not. I know that driving down Bird Road is not a game, but I know that backgammon is. But if you said, well, give me the necessary and sufficient conditions of a game, I might not be able to do that. Wittgenstein points out this in order to show that knowing the definition of something is not the same thing as knowing what a word means. And that Plato and 2,000 years of philosophy was simply wrong to think otherwise. But that's another topic for another day. According to Wittgenstein, among the many things that can count as games, there only exists what he called a family resemblance. Right? So again, there are not necessary and sufficient conditions. There might be traits you're more likely to find than others, but you're not going to get a strict definition. A student of his, Morris Weitz, in his article, The Role of Theory in Aesthetics, suggests that while Byzantine painting or ancient Greek tragedy might be concepts that we can define and say, oh, well, a necessary feature of an ancient Greek tragedy is that no violence is portrayed on stage, or that it takes place in the period of one day, or something like that, right? So those are features of ancient Greek tragedies, and we might be able to specify the necessary and sufficient conditions of Greek tragedies. But we can do this only because those are no longer active contemporary art traditions. They're fixed, and in a sense, they are completed or over now, right? And what he called closed concepts. So they're not up for redefinition or revision. But art, by contrast, he said, is naming a living contemporary process which is ongoing. And so he says the word art is an open concept, and thus it defies definition. So we can't get a good definition of art. This doesn't mean we don't know what art is. It simply means that it's an open concept. That's his phrase. And it leaves open the question as whether something is art. So if I nail a piece of rope to the wall and I say, this is my sculpture, it's an open concept as to whether or not that's art or not. You can't say, well, here's my definition. It doesn't meet my definition. That's not the way art functions today. Well, he would say it's not the way art ever functioned. Living, contemporary, developing, ongoing art. All right, so that concludes my first lecture now on obscurity and clear thinking. I messed up a couple of times. I hope it doesn't confuse you. If it does, or if I said something that you found confusing or conflicts with, I seem to have contradicted myself, please let me know, and I will try to clarify that, and I'll do a better job next time I record this lecture. Okay. Have a pleasant rest of your day.